It was a chilly morning at Andrews Air Force Base. The American flags rippled gently in the wind as a large crowd assembled for President Donald Trump's much-awaited speech, a tribute to the dedicated men and women of the armed forces. Families, veterans, cadets, and active duty personnel were lined up in perfect rows, standing tall under the soft glow of the rising sun. Among them stood a young airman named Caleb Monroe, just 24 years old. His uniform was perfectly ironed, his boots polished to a shine, but his eyes kept darting toward the stage, reflecting a storm of nerves and anticipation. Caleb's mother had driven all the way from Ohio to be there that morning. She came to see her son recognized along with other airmen during the commemorative event. However, Caleb's mind wasn't on the ceremony, nor on the president's words. In his hand, he gripped a crumpled letter, a worn piece of paper that meant far more to him than any speech or medal ever could. It was deeply personal, aged at the corners, something he had kept safe for years. As the massive screen displayed President Trump walking toward the podium, the crowd broke into enthusiastic applause. Trump waved to the cheering audience, nodded respectfully to the military officials surrounding him, and began his address. "I'm here today to honor and thank the courageous men and women of the United States military. You are the reason this nation stands strong, proud, and free," he declared. Caleb swallowed hard. An emotional storm surged inside him. His heart pounded in his chest. He was not the type to seek attention or stand in the spotlight. But today wasn't about his comfort. It was about truth. It was about honoring a vow he had made a long time ago, a promise forged in heartbreak. As the president continued to speak, Caleb's grip on the letter tightened, and his eyes began to glisten with tears. Just behind him, an older veteran observed Caleb's expression and leaned slightly toward him. "You okay, son?" he asked, with quiet concern. Caleb nodded in response, but his thoughts were racing. He knew he was running out of time. If he didn't act soon, the opportunity would be gone forever. He turned his gaze back to the stage, and the words he had rehearsed over and over again filled his mind. He realized he wasn't just one face among many in the crowd. He had a purpose, a responsibility to speak not only for himself, but for someone who could no longer speak. What he was about to do would change everything, not just for him, but for all who listened. 3 years earlier, Caleb had been just another teenager, finishing high school in rural Ohio. His life had been filled with challenges. His father had passed away when Caleb was only 9 years old, and his mother had taken on 2 jobs just to keep the family afloat. Caleb's best friend, Derek Sandoval, had been his constant source of support through those difficult years. Derek's father had once served in the Air Force, and both boys had grown up admiring that legacy. Together, they often spoke of enlisting, dreaming about serving side by side in the military. "I'm going to be a pilot," Derek used to joke, flashing a mischievous smile. "You'll be the serious one. I'll fly overhead and wave at you." They'd laugh together, their bond growing stronger with each passing year. In their final year of high school, they made a pact. No matter what happened, they would enlist together, and they kept that promise. However, life had its own plans. Just 6 months into basic training, Derek collapsed during an early morning run. He had been quietly dealing with troubling symptoms: dizziness, chest pain, and overwhelming fatigue. He had never reported them, afraid it might get him disqualified from serving. The diagnosis was sudden and devastating: a rare, aggressive heart condition. Derek passed away within a few days. Caleb was shattered. At Derek's funeral, he knelt by his best friend's casket and whispered a solemn promise, one he never shared with anyone else. "I'll serve for both of us," he said softly. "And one day, I'll make sure the world knows who you were." Today, on that parade ground, surrounded by hundreds, Caleb was ready to make good on that vow. The letter clutched in his hand was one Derek had written during training. It was addressed to a future president, a letter that had never been sent. And now, standing mere feet from the president himself, Caleb knew it was time to let Derek's voice be heard. Taking a deep breath, Caleb stepped forward, his pulse racing and hands trembling. "Mr. President," he called out, loud enough to break the rhythm of the event. The crowd fell quiet. Heads turned. Secret Service agents reached for their radios. Caleb raised both hands into the air, the letter visible for all to see. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice growing stronger. "I just need 1 minute. Please." Security began to move toward him. One agent motioned for Caleb to retreat. But President Trump held up his hand. "Wait," he said calmly. The bass grew silent once more. Trump looked directly at Caleb. "You've got something to say, son?" he asked. Caleb nodded. "Yes, sir. It's not about me. It's about someone who should be here today. Someone who never had the chance." The president stepped back from the podium. "Come on up," he said. A wave of astonishment moved through the crowd. Caleb's legs felt like they were moving on their own as he climbed the steps, still holding the letter. Trump handed him the microphone and stepped aside. Caleb turned to the crowd, his voice filled with both nerves and determination. "My name is Airman First Class Caleb Monroe," he began. "And I wasn't meant to be standing here alone. I joined the Air Force with my best friend, Derek Sandoval. We trained together. We dreamed together. But he died before he could serve." He held up the letter. "He wrote this before he passed. It was meant for you, sir. May I read it?" Trump nodded slowly. Every person in the audience seemed to be holding their breath. Caleb gently unfolded the letter, careful not to tear the aged paper. "Dear Mr. President," he began, his voice wavering, "if this ever reaches you, it means something incredible has happened. Maybe I became someone worth listening to." The crowd was motionless. Even the wind seemed to stop. "My name is Derek Sandoval. I'm just a small-town kid from Ohio. I've only just started Air Force training, and honestly, I don't know if I'll make it. It's tough. But I wanted to say something important." Caleb paused, then continued, more steady now. "Serving this country isn't about medals or recognition. It's about hope. Where I come from, kids give up on their dreams before they're even 16. But when I put on this uniform, I felt like I belonged to something greater." Caleb's voice cracked slightly, but he kept reading. "I don't want to be remembered as brave or strong. I want to be remembered as thankful. Thankful for the chance to wear the flag, to stand beside my best friend Caleb. And if I don't make it through this, I hope he does. I hope he serves for both of us. And I hope someone, someday, hears my story. Not because it's unique, but because so many others are just like it." Tears welled in the eyes of soldiers, parents, officers. Even battle-hardened generals stood in silence. Caleb carefully folded the letter again. "I promised I'd carry his memory," he said, "and today I've done that." President Trump stepped forward, visibly moved. "Thank you, Airman Monroe," he said. "That was something this country needed to hear." He gently took the letter from Caleb, folded it with care, and slipped it into the pocket of his jacket. "This," he said, "will stay with me forever." Turning back to the microphone, Trump addressed the crowd again. "Today's event was about honoring our military, but it's become something even more powerful. A moment of remembrance, of brotherhood, and of promise." He paused, scanning the faces of the crowd. "We often honor victories and medals, but today we honor a promise fulfilled, a fallen airman, a friend's devotion, and the enduring spirit of America." Then, in a rare and poignant gesture, President Trump turned to Caleb and saluted him. For a second, the crowd was silent. And then applause thundered across the base. Not for the president, not for the speech, but for Caleb, and for Derek, whose voice had finally been heard. Behind Caleb, a senior officer discreetly wiped away tears. Reporters' cameras rolled. Within minutes, social media lit up. Videos of the moment went viral. Hashtags like Sure for Derek, Sir the Promise, and Mrock's Silent Letter began trending worldwide. People everywhere were moved by the heartfelt moment, not just because of what was said, but because of who said it and why. Backstage, Caleb found a quiet spot. He pulled out a photo of Derek in uniform that he kept tucked in his wallet. "We did it, bro," he whispered, his voice soft. "I kept my word." And in that moment, surrounded by strangers who had become witnesses to something bigger than themselves, Caleb finally understood.